Hello and welcome to anybody who's watching this. I'm making this video for various purposes. It's mainly to explain to some of the Zoom groups with whom I connect what my daily practice is, because they've asked me to give them a sort of demonstration and explanation of what I do each day. So this is really for anybody who's interested. And I suppose, like the rest of the world, each morning you wake up and you want to have as good a day as possible. You want your life to be as rich and vibrant and flourishing as you can make it. And that's why I've developed this routine. Generally, I've tried to borrow from all sorts of traditions, good ideas for a morning exercise, and the sort of activity which gets you set up to have a productive and life-enhancing day. I happen to live in a beautiful village in France and live very near a lovely lake. So each morning I do a walk round the lake, and that in itself is of course lovely. But while doing the walk, I perform various exercises, which I'll explain. So one thing is singing. I usually sing inside my head, but you can sing out loud if nobody is in the area, because that can be distracting and strange for people. But I sing a chant. Now, in one sense, this is quite like a Benedictine sort of prayer chant. But for instance, with the Amida Buddhist groups, they will be very familiar with chanting their own Namo Amida Bu, which, as it were, is in every way beneficial because you breathe better, you have a more harmonious and beautiful sound going through your head, and you generally resonate better. So it's partly walking, it's partly singing, as I'll explain. I do use some very simple physical movements, which I will also demonstrate. But most importantly is what's going on inside the mind, inside the head. My hope is to attune myself to everything that is good and beautiful in the universe by going through a systematic spectrum of ideas and meditative contemplations. And I'll explain each of those as we go through. So first, to say something about the singing. The Amida Buddhist community tends to follow a Pure Land practice, and they tend to have a mantra which they chant, which goes Namo Amida Bu. I vary the word slightly. Namo Amida Bu means I call to mind Amida, that is the goddess of infinite light and love, and Bu is the word for Buddha, as in awakened. So they say Namo Amida Bu. I tend to say Cosmo Amida Bu, because Namo means I call to mind, and obviously by singing you are calling to mind everything. And I prefer to start with Cosmo, because I'm thinking that I'm singing with the entire cosmos, the entire universe. The tune in my head happens to be the tune from Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, a film about St. Francis of Assisi. But obviously, if anybody wants to use this idea, you can use any song which appeals to you, or any chant which works in your head. The tune from that film, sung with Cosmo Amida Bu, that sounds a bit like this, if I can try it out loud. Cosmo Amida Bu, Cosmo Amida, Mida, Mida Bu. Do it again. Cosmo Amidabu, Cosmo Amida, Mida, Mida. So that is the background sound that is going through my head. At the same time, as long as nobody is watching and it gets embarrassing, I tend to do the very simplest possible prayer moves, starting in this position and then either working up to the top and out and down in a usual circle, or of course up from the top, out and down, or slightly more elaborately to do this move on the double helix, going up and down. So in the background of my thoughts is always something like Cosmo Amidabu, Cosmo Amida, Mida, Midabu, Cosmo Amidabu, Cosmo Amida, Mida, Midabu. So while I have that tune and those movements going on, this is what I try to think about. What I do is I use the full spectrum, somewhat like people use the chakra system, by working my way through the entire spectrum of light. Now, most of the time, of course, that means the 7 colours of which we're aware, and I do use those 7 colours, but because we know there's a whole lot of the electromagnetic spectrum that we don't see, I add in infrared and ultraviolet. So infrared before getting to red and ultraviolet after reaching ultraviolet. So that means I end up with a 9-phase spectrum. And generally the idea is to try and think about, appreciate, attend to, enjoy everything that's happening in the universe by working systematically through the total spectrum of light. Amida is the goddess of infinite light and love, so in some sense it harmonizes well with Amida. But of course, for Christians, it can easily be adapted in the sense that you are harmonizing with everything in God's creation. So, start with the smallest. I start with infrared. And at that point, I try to resonate with, attune myself to all the very smallest things which are happening. So I try to mind meld with subatomic particles, which are constantly dancing. I know we're not sure whether they're waves or particles, but you've got the muons, the quarks, the protons, the electrons, everything at the tiniest possible level. That is all happening around me, around the universe, all the time. So I start with the smallest thing. Try to notice tiny petals of flowers, twigs, ants, specks of dust. Nothing is too small. It's to help me get down to the absolutely fundamental, littlest things of life and to resonate with them and to dance along with them in my mind. And on the walk, there are always beautiful, tiny things to look at and to think about. After infrared, then I start on the spectrum proper by going into the concept of red and trying to think about associations with the redness of light. That includes things like the blood flowing through our veins, the molten magma under the earth, and red I associate with being grounded, rooted on solid earth. And I think about the solidity of the soil and the ground holding me up as I walk along. Think about all the little animals which form the sedimentary rock, or the magma which is now cooling to form igneous rock, and appreciate the crust of the earth. At that stage, thinking a bit like a physicist about the physical reality of the earth and the geological reality of the crust on which I am standing. So the next bit of the colour spectrum is orange. Now at this point, having moved on from the solidity of the earth, I start to think about water, fluidity, things flowing, and think about passion. If you're working your way up the body, then the red chakra is associated with things like the soles of your feet, the base of your spine, the bit around the center of your body, and the orange part I associate more with the organs, with the genital organs, with the organs of reproduction, with passion, with feeling. The element here is more watery, and you're trying to feel the flow of water everywhere around you. In my case, I'm lucky that I'm beside a lake or beside streams, so that makes it particularly easy. Also, when I get to orange, I try to think of the world as maybe a chemist would, in the sense that the world is constantly in the process of transformation. Things which were partly physical are transforming into different chemical structures. The molecules, the cells, everything interweaving, interacting, creating all the beautiful things that I can see around me all the time, and all the various transformative processes which are going on in my body, the photosynthesis going on in the plants, and all these fluid, passionate things. So I just try to mind meld with that. After orange, we move up to what's often called yellow. I think of it more as golden. And at this point, I nearly always am thinking of the sun. If the sun's out, that's perfect, because I can see it in the corner of my eye rather than, of course, looking directly into it. But you can see the way sunlight suffuses everything. And the sun provides, of course, so much free, usable energy that makes me think about energy and energy in the process of transformation. On my body, I'm thinking now around the solar plexus area, in a sense the place where you have guts and willpower to get things done. So when I think of yellow golden light, I like to think about the energy which flows through me and all of us, which we can use in thousands of different ways throughout the day, and to become a sort of instrument of peace and love by focusing all that available energy in the best possible way. So when I think of yellow golden light, and I certainly like to think of beams of golden light flowing down onto the people I love, especially families and children. So always happy doing the yellow phase of the spectrum, and even if the sun isn't actually physically shining, it's still exerting its enormous influence. So that was earth, water, fire. So we're working our way up through the spectrum. The next thing I tend to think about then is based on the colour green. And now, as far as the body is concerned, I have reached the heart. And that is, of course, feels like the centre of everything that matters. So when I think of green, I literally try to think of love and all the human relationships which I will have during the day, and how to make those as constructive, benign, and kind and honest as I can. Thinking of love, like most of us, I guess, I tend to start thinking of family, especially as I have 4 children and 9 grandchildren. It's irresistible to think of them. And at this point, I tend to sort of wish them well. It's like, God bless Mummy, Daddy, and all the children, and to hope that all that is good in the universe floods through all the people I love. Usually at this point, I'm well aware of my own inadequacies and failures and incompetence in relationships. So it's a chance to, as it were, help myself by allowing the universe to transform me into a much better person. Almost everybody I know actually expresses love and generosity much better than I do, so I just hope to sort of emulate some of the people who I see around me all the time. So green, of course, means that you look around, you see the grass, you see everything that grows, the nettles, the wildflowers, the trees, and the enormous amount of pure green energy that is dancing around you all the time. And so I try to remind myself of that, to become aware of that, attentive to it, appreciative of it. Above green, I start thinking about blue. Again, it is wonderful when there is blue sky, because you only need to raise your eyes and there is an abundance of pure beauty. Blue, for me, I associate mainly with music. Music to me is sort of very close to the heart. I'm singing in my head anyway. I'm trying to breathe and sing and appreciate the music of life. Very often you can hear bird song or other sounds, children playing, families talking as you go around the lake. And I think at this stage of all the great music and the way in which musicians have enormously enhanced my life. If I've recently been to the opera, I think of the opera and I think of Mozart and all sorts of musical marvels. I love hearing music, singing in choirs, playing such things. So it's trying to sort of hear the harmony of the universe, thinking of it as the great sort of orchestral performance, and just to immerse myself in that. So after blue, I move up to indigo. At this point, I try to think of thoughts, words, and communications. So for me, indigo is everything that's ever been written. I try to think about poetry, drama, novels, all sorts of people sending emails and sharing language all around the world. Thousands of different languages, 8 billion people talking, listening, communicating with each other as best they can. So for me, indigo is words and thought, and quite a lot of time thought, it transcends even the words which we can find to use. So when I get to this point, I try to remember how much I should appreciate all the people who write and who share their words. I absolutely love literature, drama, and poetry, and though I only know a tiny fragment of what's been produced on Earth, this is that bit of the spectrum for me. It's everything good that has been said, everything good that's been written and communicated. And that, of course, builds on the music. I think great songs enable you to feel the thought as well as to hear it and try to understand it. Above indigo, we get to violet. And at violet, I try to think of the most inspiring people who have ever lived or who presently live, and try to think how I can walk with them, learn from them, share in their experiences. Now, clearly for, say, Christians, they will be thinking in terms of walking with Jesus, with Mary, with one of the saints, or anybody to whom they have devotion. And the same applies in Islam or in Buddhism. You think of the people who have led inspiring lives. For Buddhists, of course, that is Siddhartha Gautama himself, the Buddha, and all sorts of followers who have lived exemplary lives. I also think of all the people who, as far as I know, have lived totally loving lives. So that tends to be mainly women in my experience. People like my mum, my Lily, who looked after me, sort of sisters, my wife, my children and my friends, all the people who actually live lives of practical love. So that's partly an imaginative exercise, walking with all the people who you want to share life's journey with. And so violet is always a delightful part of the spectrum for me. So after violet, I move up to ultraviolet. And at that point, I try literally to think of the entire cosmos. All that ever was, all that is, and all that ever will be. Absolutely without limit. Because, of course, I know that I am an extremely limited, confined specimen creature, and there's a huge amount going on out there which is outside my physical self. In fact, I try to break down all barriers between anything I think of as I or me and the rest of the cosmos. So open up to the cosmos in all its infinite possibilities. I'm agnostic. I don't know the extent of what happens. I have no idea whether there'll be afterlives, whether there are countless other universes out there, whether we know only a fragment of what could be known about the universe. But the point of ultraviolet is to complete the full spectrum so that nothing at all is missed out, no possibility is ignored, no stone left unturned. So that's what I try to think of at ultraviolet level, and that's where I think of Cosmo. I rather like to think of it as a sort of great theatrical performance being put on by Cosmo, where there's music, dance, words, light, passion, violence, earth, everything happens, and it's an enormous sort of cosmic drama. Having worked through all the spectrum, the 7 colours, infrared and ultraviolet, the next thing I think about is how each part of the spectrum interacts and builds on to the next one. So I then work my way up through infrared to the red, to the orange, to the golden, to the green, to the blue, to the indigo, to the violet, to the ultraviolet. And then I cascade down through the spectrum from ultraviolet, cosmic everything, down to violet, down to indigo, blue, green, golden, orange, red, and infrared. And I feel the way all the chakras spin and weave and build an enormously beautiful, complex sort of tapestry of thousands of things all interbeing, all reflecting into each other. In other words, try to have as sort of whole and full an experience of the universe as I can manage. So trying to put all that together. So there I am happily walking along, and the walking is definitely for me part of the joy. I know other people like to be still, I'd like to sit or stand, but I enjoy the physical walking as well. Good for you, of course. At the same time, in the head is the song, and at the same time is the physical movement. And at the same time is the thought pattern that arises with each bit of the spectrum. So as I'm walking happily along, shall we say, I'll think about the very end where I'm looking at how everything interweaves. So I actually tend to go downwards, upwards, downwards. And so if I'm, say, thinking about how infrared inspires red, this is roughly, I'll try and do it sort of all simultaneously. So I go something like this. Starting with infrared. Cosmo Amidabu. Cosmo Amida, Mida, Midabu. Work again through the spectrum, this time going upwards. Cosmo Amidabu. Cosmo Amida, Mida, Midabu. Now the spectrum cascading down from ultraviolet. Cosmo Amidabu. Cosmo Amida, Mida, Midabu. And I try to end on the heart, and I often do 2 or 3 more Cosmo Amidas around the heart to try to integrate all those various thoughts. And in that exercise, when I'm working up and down, I'm working through the spectrum from infrared up to the top and so forth, so that all 9 elements of the spectrum get included. Now, of course, everybody has their own systems for getting through the day. Everybody has their own movements, their own songs, their own thought patterns. But for me, that is the pattern I try to stick to. I'm not sure if it does me much good, but I think on the whole it does, and it feels life enhancing. And it feels, when I've done it, that I feel more relaxed, more in tune, more capable of leading a life-enhancing day, and more capable of expressing love and peace in all my relationships. So thank you very much for listening, and thanks to Suzanne for recording this.